SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. Hello. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MidDays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth Studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music. What's up there, Rhino?
Howdy.
All right, we need a little Pink Floyd, The Dark Side of the Moon there, don't we? That would be appropriate. So, we have some human beings that traveled farther away from the earth than ever in our history. That's pretty neat, isn't it? A testament to amazing American ingenuity.
And they did it on purpose this time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because the previous record was set by Apollo 13.
That's true.
When they were worried they weren't going to have enough fuel to get back, so they used the moon's gravitational pull as a slingshot.
Yeah.
So they went farther out than they intended to on that flight.
That was pretty brilliant, too, if you think about it. Given the technology available at the time to figure all that out, what a great movie it was. The Right Stuff was one of those about the Apollo, and then, of course, you had the Apollo 13 movie as well. And that was the name of the movie, as a matter of fact. That was I love those shows. I love those programs. The Right Stuff may be one of my favorite all-time movies, honestly. That was about, actually, the Mercury program, just a space program in general. The Mercury, of course, the first one, and it culminated, if you will, with the first man in space. That was the big object there, but picking the astronauts as they did, I just thought it was cool. Cool movie. And then Apollo 13 was riveting, as they say. That was pretty neat. Tom Hanks played in that one. Did a great job, I thought. So, all right, are they on their way back now? Is that the deal? The astronauts?
Yeah, they flipped over their patches and they're on their way back.
Okay.
Because the Artemis 2 mission patch had the moon and the Earth.
Yep.
And when you flip it over, it's got the Earth and the moon. In different locations.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They finished their mission to the moon. Now their mission is to get back safely to Earth.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. So they flipped the patch over, indicating that they're headed back. Cool. That's pretty neat. Well, it's a marvel of technology, in my view, and a huge accomplishment and victory for America and, again, American ingenuity and technology, innovation, all the above. Only possible in this country, and is setting up, is it not, as a precursor to send some folks up to land on the moon again, on the surface of the moon. Is that not the plan? I believe that's what they
eventually.
indicated. Yeah.
Like, I believe one of the missions, they got a ton of missions while they're up there.
Yeah.
I believe one of the missions was for the commander or the pilot, one of the two, to visually verify the geography of the south pole of the moon. Because that is a planned location to land on the moon, and I believe the reports were that it was steeper and rockier than previously believed.
Okay.
So they may be changing where they're going to land on the moon.
Oh, all right. So they're scoping out a place to set down. And we did the same thing in the Apollo mission that went to the moon.
Oh, yeah.
Same deal. Had to figure out Sea of Tranquility, right, was the ultimate location identified as the place to set down the lunar module. How cool is that, man?
And they talked about being on the dark side of the moon, the back half of the moon, with all the instrument lights out. They were able to see little flashes of light on the moon's surface because asteroids, meteorites were hitting the lunar surface.
How about that? I didn't know
and they're
that.
also naming new craters because they're up close and personal, and the moon's been hit by more stuff since the 70s.
Yeah, that's true.
So they're up there naming new craters, and I believe they named one of the craters Carroll, Carroll, in honor of the late wife of the commander.
Oh, wow. Well, that's neat. So they're sort of remapping the surface
A little bit,
based
yeah.
on new information. And the moon is unique in that it gets cratered up, and so its surface is more subject to change than ours is. Ours is usually because we did something, not nature itself.
Well, I mean, the moon doesn't
nature
have an
changes.
atmosphere, so
That's true.
any little thing can hit the surface.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas you got to have pretty significant mass to get through the atmosphere and even make it to the surface
Yeah.
without taking the correct trajectory, which the astronauts will, fingers crossed, be taking when they get back.
Yeah. Interesting, though. I think it's neat. America reviving its space program, and again, quite the accomplishment. Yeah, Apollo 13, it just hit me. It was Jim Lovell. That's who Tom Hanks played. And, of course, Bill Paxton played Mississippi native Fred Hayes. I think the last surviving crew member of Apollo 13, if I'm not mistaken. Kevin Bacon, of course, played Jack Swigert.
I'm trying to find the clip, but they played a clip for the astronauts to wake them up yesterday, and it was of the late Jim Lovell talking about his trip to the moon and welcome to my neighborhood and that kind of stuff.
Oh,
it was
that is
really
cool.
I'm trying to find it. I'll play it for you so I find
That is
it.
awesome. Ed Harris, what a masterful job he did. He's the actor that portrayed Gene Kranz, the flight controller. What a nervous job that was, a stressful job. Okay.
Hello, my name is Sue. This is Apollo astronaut. Hello. Welcome to my old neighborhood. When Frank Borman and Bill Andrews and I orbited the moon on Apollo 8, we got humanity's first up-close look at the moon and got a view of the home planet that inspired and united people around the world. I'm proud to pass that torch on to you as you swing around the moon and lay the groundwork for missions to Mars for the benefit of all. It's a historic day, and I know how busy you'll be, but don't forget to enjoy the view.
Wow.
So, Reed and Victor and Christina and Jeremy and all the great teams supporting you, good luck and Godspeed from all of us here on the good earth.
That's awesome. It's just incredible. When it is surreal, is it not, to think about just how few people have ever experienced what he and these others have experienced? What a teeny tiny exclusive club that is. That's really pretty neat to think about. And you have to acknowledge that it was him on Apollo 13 and what did he say, Apollo 8? He was part of that as well, I believe, Lovell, captain on 13. All of that paved the way for what we're doing today. Those programs in general, starting with Mercury through the Apollo program and those giant Saturn V rockets, man. And the engines built down there at Stennis, right here in Mississippi. That's just so neat to think about. Lots of Mississippi connections, and we should be certainly proud. The president, none too happy with the regime in Iran. He said, wow, this was amazing, 7:06 this morning. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight. One of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran. He says he wants free traffic of oil on the Iran deal. The markets don't know how to react to this. The Dow not liking it. I think it's the best way to describe it. Down right now 320 points. That's off the lows. It was off more than 400 points. Bond yields up as well. That means your cost of borrowing is increasing. Funny money down. It's in the $68,000 range. And the NASDAQ also down. That's largely because we're seeing the price of oil spike again today as a result of these announcements. Man, I hope we get this thing behind us sooner rather than later, because it's certainly causing lots of problems for people. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio at 10:35. Secretary of State Michael Watson with an announcement, and a Shuwaski Young candidate for Secretary of State at 11:05.
The one body.
This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
We're rolling. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
What? This is so
Awesome. On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Yeah, man, that was actually from the movie Apollo 13. You remember it was astronaut Schweigert who had the little portable radio. He was flipping around in the spacecraft there. Pretty clear to see that gravity was not pulling it back. It was just floating around in the cockpit there. It's pretty cool. So you're going to play this again for us. We were told on the text line that maybe the audio was a little low. You've adjusted that and set it up for us.
Yeah, so this is the wake-up message that was broadcast to the astronauts yesterday before they started their missions around the moon and their observations. And this is technically, it's a recording of a recording broadcast over the radio, now being broadcast over the radio. So the old joke about a copy of a copy, the quality is not excellent. So this is about as loud as I can get it without popping some speakers. But it is worth listening to because this is a message recorded by the late astronaut Jim Lovell, who passed away last August.
Yep.
And it's a message to the Artemis II astronauts. So here we go.
Hello, Artemis II. This is Apollo astronaut Jim Lovell. Welcome to my old neighborhood. When Frank Borman and Bill Andrews and I orbited the moon on Apollo 8, we got humanity's first up-close look at the moon and got a view of the home planet that inspired and united people around the world. I'm proud to pass that torch on to you as you swing around the moon and lay the groundwork for missions to Mars for the benefit of all. It's a historic day, and I know how busy you'll be, but don't forget to enjoy the view. So, Reed, and Victor, and Christina, and Jeremy, and all the great teams supporting you, good luck and Godspeed from all of us here on the good earth.
Man, that's incredible to think about his voice being around for these guys to hear, and him getting that done before he left us. That's pretty neat. But more exciting events in the future of the space program for sure. But at this point, looks like the mission achieved its objectives, went to the dark side of the moon, That's farther away than any humans have been, as you said, intentionally. Really an historic journey for sure. Looking at a photo here of the astronauts. Artemis 2 astronauts spoke with the president from their Orion spacecraft yesterday. Swung around the far side of the moon. The president said, "You've made history and made all America really proud." And then he later acknowledged the contribution of the Canadian member of the mission, Jeremy Hansen. This is really cool stuff. Exciting stuff for sure.
And to put it in perspective, because you heard the late, great Jim Lovell talking about further missions to Mars, this is a 10-day trip to the moon and back. And we have windows in which we could fly to the moon and back in that amount of time on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah.
Compare that to Mars, where you got about a 4 or 5 day window every 2+ years. I think it's 26, 27 months between windows to Mars. And then to get to Mars, one way, depending on when in the window you launch, is between 6 and 9 months.
That's incredible. Very,
so
very
that is
exciting.
a major leap, a major step forward that would have to be required before we could take that leap.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. Here in the state of Mississippi, by the way, we got the latest revenue report from the Legislative Budget Office, that for the month of March. Total collections were 3.86% above the revised revenue estimate, so that's good news, some $20 million. Fiscal year-to-date revenue through March 26 are actually up $119 million, or 2.32% above the estimate. So with respect to the comparison to the prior year, up about $80 million overall revenue, or 1.54% above the prior year. We estimate 7.5 and change million dollars. That's the revised 2026 revenue estimate. Now, you got to be careful when you look at a single month, especially the month of March, when you're bumping up against the April tax filing deadline. I think a lot of folks anticipating a refund from the federal government this year maybe got their returns in a little sooner than normal, so they can go ahead and get in the line to get that refund. And the IRS, by the way, is warning, we don't have the staff we used to, so it may take a while if we owe you money. So they do process electronic returns before the returns that were mailed. So those that were filed using the IRS's electronic systems, the e-files, what it's called, those are prioritized in the processing. Next are those that are electronically generated but not filed electronically. And then those are succeeded by returns that are actually prepared manually. That's literally how they do it. That's how they prioritize the processing of returns. Kind of makes sense. But relatively good news in the state of Mississippi. I'll admit I was a bit concerned. Now, it's hard to tell. Is some of this just a function of a little bit more inflation than we expected? Hard to tell, honestly. And what also surprised me, just looking at the data, is that our sales taxes relative to the fiscal year to date are down relative to the estimates, but individual income taxes are up. So I'm surprised at that, honestly. Just am. I would have thought sales taxes would have been down, or up, I should say, and income taxes would have been down. But it's quite the opposite. And again, you can't really look at a single month and draw any conclusions from that. For fiscal year 25 versus 26, or 26 versus 25, sales taxes up about $17 million. Use taxes, that's essentially sales taxes, if you will, but on goods you buy online, up about $50 million. That's interesting. That means we're buying more online, and that could be why sales taxes generated from within the state are actually down, because we're spending more money online, and so that all kind of works out. And then individual income tax, again, year over year, improved by $49 million, just under 50. Corporate income taxes down slightly, less than 1% relative versus the prior year. So good news there. I'm, again, concerned, and especially given that we're increasing spending down there at the Capitol for fiscal year 27. Now, of course, these revenue figures are 26. It's hard to predict 27, although there are people that are charged with that task. The Legislative Budget Office, the state economists, and Department of Finance and Administration, Department of Revenue, all sort of collaborate to come up with these figures and project revenue. A lot harder to project, of course, than expenses, because expenses are appropriated by the legislature, and that's just based on what you expect to come in the way of revenue. Two major revenue sources, of course, in the state. That's individual income taxes and sales taxes, with sales taxes accounting for about 38%. Use taxes, also a form of sales tax, if you will, because they're charged on the goods you buy online. That is another significant amount of revenue. And so when you combine those two, you're nearly 40% of total revenue, sales taxes, use taxes. Income taxes then just behind it at about 28%, followed by corporate income tax and some other various taxes. But good news there on the state front. But there's some daycare grants that the state of Mississippi reduced in this year's budget that's getting some attention from the Democrats in particular in the state. Not happy. Coming back in the Element Wealth studio with Secretary of State Michael Watson.
From the
Attention, adoring fans! It's time for
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Well, bless my soul, what's wrong with me? I'm itching like a man on a fuzzy tree. My friends say I'm acting wild as a bug. I'm in love, I'm all shook up. Yeah, yeah. Well, my hands are shaky and my knees are weak. I can't seem to stand on my own.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. We thank you so much for joining us today. It's our pleasure to welcome now Mississippi's Secretary of State, Michael Watson. Mr. Secretary, thanks for calling in today.
Man, yeah, great to be on with you again, Gerard. Beautiful weather down here on the coast, so we're having a great day.
All right, so tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so we just announced our first public in an event in Pascagoula that we'll be running for Lieutenant Governor, so really excited about that, and really just to get to work. You know, we're going to be traveling around the state, listening to Mississippians and understanding the issues that are most important to them, and I think people understand I'm a conservative. It's not just talking points. It's actually what I believe. So important to have that at the Lieutenant Governor's office as we face the challenges, moving forward as Mississippi and growing our state even bigger and better.
All right, so you have made one stop thus far today, right? And you're en route to your next stop. Is that correct?
That's right. We left Pascagoula and about to pull into Gulfport, and so we'll be in Hattiesburg after this, and Jackson, 4 more cities tomorrow, and 3 more cities on Thursday. So trying to get as much of the state as we can. Again, it's important to listen to Mississippians and the issues that are important to them.
All right, the barnstorming Secretary of State. That's what we got going on right now. So you're making your way throughout the state. So what motivated you, Mr. Secretary, to jump in this race and throw your hat in the ring, as it is said, to run for lieutenant governor?
Yeah, Gerard, it's never been a stepping stone or a climbing a ladder issue to me. It's always been where do I think I could do the most good. And my dad and my mom as pastors and a pastor wife, it was just kind of drilled on our head, love God and serve others. And so we've always tried to figure out, where can I do the most good for Mississippi and which spot is that? And so really just kind of praying about it. My experience in the state Senate, experience here in the Secretary of State's office really leads to the ability to be ready on day one to just serve as lieutenant governor, understanding the policy positions that are important to Mississippians, and really just having the guts to have hard conversations and making sure that we're moving Mississippi in the right direction.
Tell us what your thoughts are as far as your legislative priorities, should you be fortunate to be elected by the good people of Mississippi into this office of lieutenant governor. As you know, the lieutenant governor, it could be argued in the state of Mississippi, the way our government is structured, may be the most powerful legislator. I'm going to just go ahead and throw the lieutenant governor into that category because they do preside over the Senate, may have more influence over legislation than anybody else in the state.
Yeah, look, it's a powerful position. I think the important thing is to use that power for the good of people, not myself, and that's going to be our focus. When we look at issues, I think number one, you start with the conservative mindset. How do we shrink the size and scope of government where Mississippians can have more decisions of their own without the tentacles of government messing with them or impeding their progress with small businesses, et cetera. You think about the core functions. We talk about transportation. That's a job builder, making sure they got great roads and bridges. You think about public safety. Again, the core functions are really important. But most important to me right now is, as we travel the state, listening to Mississippians and learning the issues that are really important to them as they sit around their kitchen tables. What is it that we can do to make their lives easier, to get government out of the way, to provide the opportunity for more businesses to locate here, more opportunities for our future leaders that are growing up right now.
At this point, and I know this is brand new, so you're just formally announcing today. Mr. Secretary, have you had any of those conversations? I know in your current line of work, of course, you travel the state, you talk to people across the great state on a regular basis. What are you hearing from them, if anything, as far as what their needs and priorities are?
Well, as you know, we've talked about this a lot. Election integrity is always one of the issues that pops up. We want to make sure that when we walk into that ballot booth, the vote that we cast is the vote that is counted. So we've got a track record of protecting the vote, making sure that we've got integrity in our process. The second thing we hear a lot about, obviously the Secretary of State's office, is something that we've really focused on, is cutting the regulatory burden. Again, shrinking the size and scope of government. Businesses should be focused on innovation and doing their work as opposed to dealing with red tape and bureaucracy. So those are two that have been forefront with us that we hear about quite often. You also hear about the economy. You hear about folks saying, hey, what about my son, my daughter? What are the opportunities they're going to have? And so Mississippi's really growing in the right direction right now. And then I'd say lastly, you talk about, I wouldn't say maybe the word dysfunction, but we need some more collaboration at the state level between the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker, building those relationships back. And again, sometimes there are personalities, sometimes there are policy differences. That's okay. Mississippi deserves better. We got to make sure that we're working together to move our state forward. So that'll be a focus of mine as well. And I've got a track record of building relationships. It's an important part of Secretary of State's job, and will be an important part of the lieutenant governor's office as well.
With respect to some of the issues that legislatively did not make it across the finish line this year that seemed to garner most of the attention, Mr. Secretary, let's start with the issue of education freedom. Do you have a position on that you'd like to share today?
Yeah, look, I think parents ultimately should have the majority of the decisions about the education of their children should be empowered. What is the education that fits my child best? That's always going to be a front burner issue for us. I went to public school. My children started in public school. My wife's a teacher, so we'll be working hard on education issues. But that being said, the vast majority of students will always be in public education. So we've got to make sure that our public education system is strong and thriving as we move forward. And I tell you this, Gerard, we've got another session, so we can't get too early to any of those issues. The legislature may decide to take that up, but we'll be listening to Mississippians across the state, making sure what issues are important to them.
Yeah, of course. One thing you'll hear from state government employees, both active and retired, is the stability of the public employees retirement system. couple of reforms made along those lines to the Tier 5 program that was enacted into law last year, but those actually reverse the effort to further stabilize the program. Those couple of reforms were still no infusion of cash. We still have a big problem hanging out over us to the tune of about $25 billion. You got any thoughts there?
Yeah, I will say this. I appreciate the lieutenant governor having the guts to at least address the issues. Speaker as well. Senator Sparks has done a phenomenal job with that. That was an issue that, when I was in the Senate, we talked about it quite a bit. And we were always told, hey, it's going to be fine. It's not going to be fine. And we got to keep, quit kicking the can down the road. So getting around the table with experts, getting those opinions, I think that's what's made me a successful Secretary of State, is listening to the folks that know the most about issues, forming opinions with their education and their smarts, making the right decisions for our folks. So it's an issue that will stick around, one that we'll continue to focus on. But I'll tell you this, Gerard, the state made a commitment to our state employees, and that is utmost. We've got to make sure we honor that. That said, there's hard work to be done, and we'll get it done.
Okay, awesome. Restoration of the citizen-initiated ballot measure process. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we talked about that a lot at the beginning, especially when the Supreme Court struck down the initiative. And I think it's one that should have been fixed then. As you know, I'd offered an amendment in the state Senate when I was serving then to fix it long ago before it even became an issue. So that's something that we've talked about a good deal. I'll tell you this, as we talk to more Mississippians and you kind of think through the issues, I think some people are concerned when you look at what's happened around the country, the issues that come up with the initiative process, things like abortion and et cetera, that may not be the best for conservatives. I think we've got to be careful with that, make sure that the threshold is high enough. It should be hard to change the Constitution. So we got some work to do, but yeah, I do think that's something that people probably should have. We just need to make sure we do it correctly. Gotcha.
Mobile sports betting. You bet on the coast, and this is something that was offered by Representative Casey Uri. I think this is the third attempt in as many sessions, not getting across the finish line in the Senate. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm most familiar with that's been the leverage piece that they've killed my legislation dealing with tidelands along the coast.
Yeah.
So I've had an up close and personal relationship with that. At the end of the day, I think for me it's always been, how do you give people more freedoms and more abilities to make decisions for themselves? But again, you think about gambling and the event of individuals that are young, college age, et cetera, that may be getting involved and making bad decisions. So again, it's one of those things that you got to be very careful with how you proceed. But at the end of the day, I think Mississippians should have the ability to spend their money how they want, to play games as they wish, and I think we got to get it done correctly.
Okay. Another major controversial issue in this particular session was reform of the pharmacy benefit manager industry. Ended up really striking out altogether there. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, and that's something we don't have a choice. We got to do. We got to do some work to that as well. Again, another session coming, and hopefully they can earn that out. Yeah. That said, when you look at the impact it's going to have on our small businesses, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
But it's also our small pharmacies. I get it, but the key is here we got to be careful where we don't use government to protect folks.
Yeah.
Let's let free market work its way. Let's make the types of amendments that we need so that the pharmacies around the state can, expand and do the work they need to do. I also think it's a scope of practice issue. How do we give pharmacies the ability to do more things in their pharmacies, which would drive more customers? So it's not just a PBM issue. I think it's a bunch of issues that we could do to help our pharmacies around the state.
Secretary of State Michael Watson has been our guest calling in. He's on his campaign announcement tour. Mr. Secretary, thanks for calling in. Congratulations. Appreciate you joining us today. You guys be careful. Might see you tonight.
Thanks, Gerard. Take care, buddy.
We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
At the Citizens Bank.
Come on. MidDays with Gerard Gibert.
All right, we are back
on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
I want to be famous. I start to scream. You can do something in between. Maybe you can drive my car. Yes, I'm gonna be a star.
Welcome back, everyone. It's MidDays from the Element Wealth studio. The Texas Johnson Space Center firmly in control of Artemis 2. Watching the screen right now in the studio, it's Governor Greg Abbott of the great state of Texas who was talking about that. The Dow continues its sell-off. Not too happy, really, about the president's Truth Social, his Truth, as it is called, this morning, where he basically said it could be the end of civilization in Iran as we know it. He did not mince any words. Pretty strong coming from the president. Not really sure what to think about that. Neither are the markets. And what I mean by that is exactly what would the president do? And some are saying that he could unload on the island of Karg. By the way, it got bombarded again last night, right, by American and Israeli armed forces, and mainly military targets is what my understanding is, right? No civilian targets. Speaking of civilian targets, when the president said he'd start blowing up bridges and power plants, you saw what the regime did. They, I don't know if they forced, but they may have. I couldn't find any reports that said they forced, but the civilians in these areas to like form a human fence, a human shield, if you will, around these facilities. Yeah. Oh, they're not, what am I trying to say? Barbaric, I think is the word I'm looking for. Without any concern of human life whatsoever. This is what the communists in Vietnam were doing. Remember that? Sending toddlers into nests of American soldiers, loaded up with bombs, sending them their way.
Yeah, they take the pin out of a grenade and put it in a toddler's hand, knowing the toddler can't hold that spring for very long.
And then send them on their way.
Into
right.
Wherever the military service members were.
And when that was figured out by our military, literally having to shoot the toddlers coming at them to protect themselves. How in the world do you live with yourself after that? This is why they came back with all kinds of post-traumatic stress issues. I mean, that would do it to you. I don't see how you could ever return to normal mental stability if you literally had to execute infants.
There's a story of one soldier. He was in a village, and one of the local orphans had taken a liking to him, so he was sharing his meals, shared his chocolate bar when he was lucky enough to get one, and let the kid sleep next to him to stay warm at night.
Unbelievable.
Did that for a couple of days, and then one night in the middle of the night, they wake up to tracers flying over their head, so they start shooting into the darkness in the direction of where the tracers are coming from, and the shooting stops, so they get a few winks, and in the morning they go out to look at what happened, and there's that kid with an AK-47 that had been shooting at him the night before.
You can't fathom it. But is this not a modern-day version of that, when you've got the regime that are forcing civilians, including children, go be a human shield around our power plants, our bridges, so that the Americans and the Israelis won't bomb them, won't destroy them, knowing that would also take
That's why the European nations, and I guess most of the nations around the world, were so confused that the U.S. would expend so much to get the airmen back.
Yeah.
It's because America hasn't fought a country since World War II that would abide by the Geneva Conventions on prisoners of war.
That's true. That's a good point.
And even in World War II, that was only in the European theater.
That's right.
Only on a good day.
Not in the Pacific theater. The Japanese certainly didn't do that. No, you're right about that. Yeah, and only on a good day. It was. There were still breaches even in the European theater. We just didn't often know about it until perhaps we would recover those brave soldiers. But in this case, the airman, he kept seeking higher ground with the beacon. Just brilliant. If there's, again, like I said yesterday, if there's any question that America's military is the most sophisticated, the most advanced, the most powerful, and the most competent, the most skilled of any on the planet. And I applaud the president for pointing that out and praising our military. Again, the unique aspect of America is that civilians control the armed forces. That was by design, and it was brilliant design. And so these people are going to do a job that they are asked to do by our elected leaders. Period. End of story. And they do it. And they're damn good at it. Gee whiz, it's incredible how good they are. You think about extracting that airman inside the country like that, behind the lines. It's just incredible what they were able to pull off without a hitch. God bless all of them and thank them for their service. Fox News, SuperTalk News next. And then it's Shuwaski Young. He's a candidate for Secretary of State. Stay with us. Hour of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
And now, the talk that keeps Mississippi talking.
That's what I like to listen to.
You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert. Here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 2 of Middays. We're so pleased you're with us today. We are, of course, in the Element Well studio. It's our pleasure to welcome now Shuwaski Young, a candidate for a Secretary of State of Mississippi. That would be in the 2027 election cycle. Also is a Neshoba County Republican Executive Committee member. Shuwaski, good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Gerard, thank you so very much for having me on again. It's always good to see you all here at Super Talk.
All right, so tell the folks your history. Start with that a little bit. Your past political history and how you got to where you are now as a candidate for Secretary of State.
Absolutely. Well, I think most folks know and understand that, back in 2022, I did announce my candidacy for United States Congress. And during that particular time, I was part of the Democratic Party here in the state of Mississippi. And as time progressed, I actually ran for office again as Secretary of State on the Democratic ticket. Was both the Democratic nominee for both of those particular races. And what I actually began to see, is that I saw a Democratic Party shifting further and further from the left of what I had always known as a party that, was one I actually recognized, and it was one now I don't recognize. So I actually ended up leaving the Democratic Party. Didn't agree with, how we're, putting boys in girls' bathrooms. Didn't agree with how we're looking at the economy and what's best, even taxing capital gains taxes and things of that nature. And certainly didn't agree, with how we're pushing just abortion on demand all across our country. So for those particular reasons, I came back, had a couple of years to actually think about it, write some op-eds about it, talk about my political beliefs, and let folks know that I'm actually a Christian conservative and joined the Republican Party. And ever since then, I've been going around the state talking to people about just that.
So when you're appreciate that background, that overview, and getting us caught up. So I remember talking to you either right before or right after you officially announced. When was that?
Right. That was in June 2025. It was right before the Neshoba County Fair last year.
Okay, that's what it was.
In the heat of the summer.
Yeah. All right. So I remember that, and I expect then that you've been traveling throughout the state, talking to folks about your candidacy, your qualifications, and your vision for the office. So share some of that with us.
Sure. So absolutely. What we're seeing right now is real momentum building up in our particular race right now. And that's because I held my word that I gave to you and the rest of the listeners in the state of Mississippi during that time in June of 2025, that I was going to do the hard work and go around the state and talk to voters, listen to voters, and actually talk about, why I believe that I'm the best person for Secretary of State. And in doing so, folks have had an opportunity to look me in my eye, and I've had an opportunity to look them in their eye and answer the hard questions and talk about what's most important for me and important for this race, which is strong election integrity, making sure that we have a government that's going to work for the people of Mississippi as it relates to business, and also making sure that we protect our elections more than anything. And that has been the conversation that's happened across the state, and I think that's why people are beginning to respond in such large numbers.
So, as you know, Mississippi just enacted what's called the SHIELD Act,
right.
which does introduce some additional measures to ensure that our voter rolls only contain legal American citizens, which, according to our law, are the only people who are eligible to vote. What do you think about that legislation? And the Secretary of State, of course, would have a key responsibility in discharging the provisions of that law.
Well, I've always been a strong component of actual voter ID, number one. Number two, I believe that the SHIELD Act, along with the Save America Act, that's at the federal level being talked about, hasn't been passed yet, are exactly what we need. We need to make sure that we're protecting our elections, making sure that people who are voting in our election, both particularly in our country, but specifically here in Mississippi, are actual citizens of this country and residents of our state. And the only way to actually prove that, with the way in which our elections have advanced these days, is making sure that people can show proof of citizenship.
Yeah, so there are some, as you know, in your former party that say that this is going to disenfranchise voters and make it significantly more difficult for them to prove their citizenship and get to a point where they can actually cast a ballot. What do you think about that?
I think it's insulting. I think it's insulting because most of the folks they're talking about black votes and are talking about the elderly. And particularly with black folks, I think what you're trying to actually communicate in kind of a roundabout way is somehow black folks don't know how to get an ID. And that's just insulting for me, number one. The fact is, if someone needs to go vote, they have to have an ID to actually do so. You need to board a plane. You need to go do other things in our country. So having an ID to vote shouldn't be that hard of an actual challenge for anyone. And I think that that's just something they use for fear tactics. And I want to be able to see us move toward a society where everyone just knows just common sense to have an ID to actually vote.
Okay. So you don't feel like that it's overbearing and that anything that because the Democrats are really going crazy on this, and they're going crazy on it at the federal level as well across the country with respect to the SAVE Act, which hasn't been enacted, and really the SHIELD Act to a great extent is just kind of a smaller, microcosm of that.
It's a state level approach to the same.
Same. Right. Same measures to ensure that only legal citizens are contained on the voter rolls. So, and then the process that the Secretary of State, or the role the Secretary of State would play in this to ensure that the SIMS system, the statewide election management system, only contains voters who are legal, and that's cross-checked with the various federal databases. And there's an annual process the Secretary of State would be required to run to check the existing voter rolls against the SAVE database to ensure only citizens. You're good with all that, huh?
I'm absolutely good with that. I think being able to perform a quality assurance test on a yearly basis, making sure that people who are on the voter rolls actually belong on the voter rolls and that they are in fact citizens of this country is a way for us to ensure that our elections will have the highest level of integrity. We don't want people double voting. We don't want people voting who should not be voting, and we certainly don't want people who voting who are not American citizens. And I think that legislation like this, which is the SHIELD Act, along with the Save America Act, is a great step toward ensuring that our elections are going to be safe and secure.
Okay. What are your other thoughts about Secretary of State? Some things you like, you want to continue, some things that you'd like to work on to even improve the office even more than it has been?
Sure. Well, I know that Secretary Watson just made an announcement that he's going to be, seeking higher office, and good luck to him in all that pursuit. And I just like to say he's done a great job, over the course of the last couple of years as serving as Secretary of State. What I would like to see is a modernization of the office, right? Moving kind of faster and better than we have in the past. More importantly for me, I want to see paper ballots as a uniform way of voting across all 82 counties. I don't think that it's a good idea for folks to be voting differently in DeSoto County than they do in Neshoba County. So paper ballots is where I actually want to see the state go. And I think there's a lot of folks out there who have the same appetite.
So with respect to paper ballots, presently many counties, such as my county of Madison, we use paper ballots, but we scan those paper ballots.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yep.
So are there some counties that are using machines?
Absolutely.
All machines?
All machines.
No paper?
No. Well, you may have that as an option, but the primary way in which they're actually voting for many of those precincts, they're voting actually on a touchscreen machine, such as DeSoto County,
okay,
as well as Bolivar County, I believe.
Okay.
And what I've seen and heard from a lot of different folks is, they go there and you're pressing a button for, candidate A, and it's actually selecting candidate C, and you got to go select candidate C for it to select candidate A. And, it's just a way in which we can actually be sure that votes are being counted accurately. There's also a very high concern that these particular machines can be hacked into, and I think that those particular concerns can be satisfied or remedied by ensuring that we're all voting the same way, which is filling out a sheet, sticking it in a machine, and getting away.
Now, is this something the Secretary of State could do, or would this require law passed by the legislature?
Well, my understanding from my team is that we're going to get this through state legislature.
Okay,
right?
That's what I thought.
And that's something that I want to be able to work hard in.
Okay.
I want to be able to build relationships with folks across the House and also the Senate to pass things that are going to be beneficial for the state. Moving to that same point, that's why I want to be able to see more increased funding in the Department of Public Safety, so we can actually ensure that we increase our likelihood for a better business community as well, too. And that's going to take working with the state legislature in order to do that as well.
Anything with respect to business services, public lands? Those are two other major areas of responsibility of the Secretary of State. Did you want to talk about?
Well, I think as it relates to business services and things of that nature, I think that, going back when I used to work at the Secretary of State's office, that's where a lot of folks actually come in getting information about how to actually start a business, how to actually move forward with it, and where they need to go actually file things. And when I've talked to folks, who are in the development area of our particular state, a lot of folks don't know that, such as if you're trying to actually start a business and you're a minority and you're a veteran, you have to go to two different places in order to get that done, both the Secretary of State's office and the Department of Development.
I got you.
I want to make sure we change that and streamline it.
Okay. Sounds good. Shuwaski Young, he's a candidate for Secretary of State in the great state of Mississippi. Has been our guest. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
And now, the talk that keeps Mississippi talking.
Now, on to the real part.
Dynamite!
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
So, don't stop me now. Don't stop me, 'cause I'm having a good time. Having a good time. I'm a shooting star leaping through the sky like a tiger, defying the laws of gravity. I'm a racing car passing by. Stopping me, I'm burning through the sky, 200 degrees, just while they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light, I wanna make a supersonic man out of you. Don't stop me now.
Welcome back, everyone. It's middays from the Element Wealth studio. So it's kind of interesting. We interviewed the current Secretary of State and a candidate for Secretary of State on the same day. How about that? We're back with you, though. So we were talking earlier about the changes in the funding for daycare vouchers, child care vouchers. The Senate voted and then ultimately settled on a reduction of the amount of money that goes to the daycare program. And I wasn't even sure that we had. I didn't know until I saw this that we actually had a daycare voucher program in Mississippi. I didn't know that. So the state, people have been calling on the state to address this crisis, is what it's being called, a child care crisis. And so we come up with this program, and they're not happy. I think $15 million is where we settled. It is thought that there's a wait list for these vouchers that would total about $60 million. That, according to Bob Anderson, director of the Mississippi Department of Human Services. So Senator David Blunt, a Democrat from Jackson, said he'd like to see an increase in the funding from the $15 million. But I think that's where they ended up settling, if I'm not mistaken, Rhino, with respect to the daycare vouchers in the state of Mississippi. Gee, I'm shocked because I didn't even know there was such a thing. Were you familiar with this daycare voucher, child care voucher program?
Vaguely, yeah.
I wasn't familiar with it, but looks like
it's got some restrictions. Like I think you have to have the parents of the child have to be employed or in school.
Okay.
You can't have more than that's the one thing that sticks out to me. It's like some ridiculous number of. It's a cutoff for the assets. It's like you can't have more than $2 million in assets or something like that, which just seems crazy that you would need child care assistance if you have $2 million in assets. But there's another one. It's about the income, and I don't remember what the percentage is, but it's not based on the poverty level. It's based on median income, and it's something like 85% of median income. If you fall below that, you qualify.
Okay. Yeah, it would be probably the median household income, and it's probably by region of the state because the overall state's median household income is roughly $55,000. So, but that varies depending on the area within the state. But I just
remember the guidelines were kind of broad.
Oh,
because I mean,
okay,
if you make 85% of the median income, you likely don't have. It's either $1 million or $2 million in assets is the cutoff. Seems like the most restrictive part of it was that the parent had to be employed or in school.
Interesting. So it's $15 million. I misspoke. $15 million that was cut from the program. I said it ended up being funded at a level of $15 million, but it's $15 million. I misspoke. It's being cut. So I don't know exactly how much was allocated. The Department of Human Services said the $15 million in federal funds used for that program's been reallocated to cover administrative costs for SNAP. That's because we're facing a big penalty that we talked about if we don't get the error rate down, and also the fact that the federal government in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act used to cover 50% of SNAP administration, where the states kicked in 50%. But the One Big Beautiful Bill Act changed that, requiring states to shoulder 75% of administrative costs. And so, bottom line is, our cost of administering the food stamps program at the state level went up as the federal government's cost and share of it went down. Just transferred more of that responsibility to the states, and that is being pointed to by the legislature as a reason to slash the $15 million from the child care vouchers. 15,000 children use those vouchers, according to the report I'm looking at here. 9,000 families on the wait list. Well, I had no idea, honestly. This is a tough one. Is this not another situation where you do wonder, is this a core function of government? You know, should the government be in the child care voucher business? We talked yesterday about how the president last week said, yeah, Medicare, Medicaid, child care, daycare, we can't afford all that. We got to ask the states to pick this up. That, even if it means they've got to raise taxes, is what he said, essentially. So the attitude is changing. He says basically we're in the middle of a war, and we got to make sure our military's strong, and that's where we're going to be spending our money. Is what he said last week, and that's on top of what we're seeing here. So I think the states, honestly, as time progresses, should be preparing to receive less money from the federal government, regardless of what the program's for. Our Medicaid program, as we've mentioned so many times before, is the beneficiary of about $7 billion a year from the federal government, $840 million for the food stamps program. Significant amount of money, I don't know how many billions, into our K-12 education. Those are probably the three big recipients of federal dollars that fund general fund type services here in the state of Mississippi. This is a big deal, though, that the government, state government, says, yep, we're going to have to reallocate some of this money, looking at a pretty tight budget here. Interesting. The Clarion Ledger here locally had an interesting article, and it concerns, it was really a test, if you will, to see how much you know about the 2026 session. That's kind of interesting, and it starts out by, of course, reporting that we had 6,000 pieces of legislation. Most of that never even got any discussion. They're reporting, Rhino, that 500 bills cleared all the way through the governor, or they're awaiting the governor's signature. 500 of the 6,000. So that's a little better than I thought. When we looked at it not so long ago, we were both, you and I were a bit shocked at just how few had made it across the finish line or were waiting. So that situation improved, of course, and many of those are just your standard appropriations bills. But they had
how many did they say?
They say 500 bills either cleared and have been signed or await his signature. What are you seeing in our tool there?
I'm seeing 193.
That sounded more reasonable to me, so I'm not sure where they got this figure. I didn't go back and check it, but I'm glad you did. And, of course, the tool we used is pretty dang accurate and always has been historically for sure. I see no reason that it wouldn't be this year. And they also said 6,000 total bills filed. That sounded like a little more than I thought. I don't think 500 cleared. They basically, now here's what they say. All or most of their obstacles in their paths to becoming law, and they have either been approved by the governor or await his signature. So, yeah, I would say.
Grand total of 4,005.
All right, so they're off a couple thousand there. All right, off there. But they did have a little test of your knowledge to see if you know what happened during the 2026 legislative session. Just for the heck of it, I took it, and I got every answer right except one. And that one was I wasn't sure what the age is that allows a person to go back to community college and have the state, I guess, pay for all or most of that. I got that one wrong. So, but the rest of them I got right. Coming right back in the Element Well studio.
From the Seabrook, Middays with Gerard Gibert.
It is on
SuperTalk, Mississippi.
We're back with you in the Element Well studio. So I'll give you a sample of some of the questions here, Rhino. Which area did House Speaker Jason White target in his signature legislation this session? State income tax, public employees retirement system, or school choice?
That would be C.
Correct. The one I missed, by the way, let's see if I can find it, would have to do with the age below which one can receive free classes at our community college. Starting at which age, I should say. Starting at which age. And it turns out, let's see if I can't get it up now. So that just came about.
Yeah, that's the upskill program.
Yeah.
You got to be 24 or older.
That's right. So I missed that. I thought it was 30 for some reason. That was one of the options. So I blew that one. But that's the only one that I missed of the whole deal. The rest of them I thought were fairly straightforward. Oh, you'll love this one. How many seconds did a Senate committee take to kill White's bill after it passed the House? And and we're talking about, of course, HB2, the Education Freedom Act. Now, you played it for us on the show right after it happened, and you calculated 84 seconds to be precise. They say it's 90, by the way. So 6-second difference. But that was fun when you played that, honestly. That was the old, all those in favor, say aye. All opposed. Well, the nays have it. That's the way that deal went down. Oh, my gosh. Crazy. That this was kind of fun, though. I applaud the Clarion Ledger for getting this out there. Legislators killed a bill that would have exempted what kind of money from state income tax? Money from name, image, and likeness deals, tips for restaurant workers, self-employed workers' salaries. There you go. Oh, me.
Leave it to the legislature to choose the worst one out of those.
That's right. Oh, man. What a bill that died would have allowed Mississippians to hunt which kind of animal? Black bears, skunks, or horses? Several bills legalizing mobile sports betting. This is a good one here, actually. Failed this session. How many years have lawmakers tried to legalize the activity, including 2026? Well, I think I may have just mentioned that in our interview with the secretary running for lieutenant governor. That would be 3, of course. 3 total years. Where would the revenue from mobile sports betting have gone if one of the bills proposing it had passed? The Highway Repair Fund, the state education budget, or the Public Employees Retirement Fund? And that would be, of course, the PERS system, the Public Employees Retirement Fund. Which group did legislators revive a pay raise bill for after initially killing more than a dozen related bills early in the system? First responders, nurses, or teachers? I didn't think that one was too terribly hard, but it depends on how much folks are out there paying attention, I guess. That would be the teachers. First responders did get a little bit of a reprieve in the change in the number of years required to retire at any age in the public employees retirement system in Tier 5. Prior tiers, mainly Tier 4, already stipulated that 30 years were required to retire at any age. Tier 5 increased that number of years to 35. That lasted a year, and it got reduced back down to 30. And the only point I was making is the design of that was to essentially reduce the amount of benefits going out potentially and increase the amount of money coming in. You're working longer before you can retire at any age, and then you theoretically would be retired for fewer years. I agree that was unreasonable for first responders, but the legislature saw fit to reverse it in total and return it to the 30-year baseline. But that still leaves the fund in a situation in need of more reforms to address the unfunded liability. I mean, the purpose of that was to partially address that, not solve the problem totally, but to partially address that. And the return to work provisions, which were adjusted as well this year, I think that was a good move. To some extent, that potentially, depending on the actuarial analysis, could serve to destabilize the fund even further and put even a larger unfunded liability on the program. But maybe not. It just depends on how people react to those changes, allowing you to start, if you want to return to work after retiring from the public employees retirement system. You used to have to sit out 90 days. Now you can sit out 30 and get back in. And you can also get paid up to 80% of the standard pay for the job that you return to as a retired person and still draw your retirement benefits. So that could potentially have a negative financial impact on the fund. It really remains to be seen. But those were the major provisions that affected the public employees retirement system. The Peter G. Peterson Foundation. This is a think tank that I like to review their writings, their analyses. I generally disagree with virtually everything they write. They're a more left-leaning think tank, and they write a lot about fiscal matters, tax issues at the federal level. But this article today, 10 of the largest individual tax breaks explained. Well, I'm a person who's really never taken kindly to this concept of tax break. Allowing people to keep more of the money that they legitimately, lawfully earned, I don't consider that to be a tax break. I believe that presumes that income, wealth in general, originates with government, and whatever they let you keep is just out of their altruistic attitude and their just charity to allow people to keep what they actually earn. So one of the things they talk about is exclusion of contributions to your 401k plan from taxation. You contribute pre-tax. Comes out of your pay into your 401k plan, and your employer can contribute in some sort of matching arrangement, and that's not considered tax to the employee. But they say that costs $383 billion a year. That's what it amounts to. And then taxing dividends and capital gains at a different rate than ordinary income, they say that costs $304 billion a year. If your employer pays some portion of your health care premiums, those who offer coverage, if they're more than 50 employees, they do or they pay penalties to the federal government, and they have to pay enough towards your premiums to ensure that your cost of premiums does not exceed, I think it's now 8.8% of your gross pay. Well, they're saying that the exclusion of those employer contributions for medical insurance, well, that's a tax break. It's $226 billion. Just incredible. Child care tax credit, I could be down for that one. That's just pure welfare. And then the deduction for qualified business incomes called QBI. This applies to small, mid-sized businesses. They just get to take a certain percentage of it, 23% to be exact. They just get to reduce the total amount that's passed through to them before they do their tax return by 23% before they compute their actual tax liability, and they're saying that's just a huge tax break. And then exclusion of capital gains at death, the state and local tax deduction. In other words, they want double taxation. It's really what it amounts to me. Pay taxes on top of the taxes. We're going to step aside for a break. We got another segment in hour 2. We got some text on the text line we're going to get to. Stay with us.
Up of Mississippi.
You know what that means.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
We'll do it live
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Yeah, here comes Amos. Now Amos Moses was a Cajun. He lived by himself in the swamp. He hunted alligator for a living. He just knock him in the head with a stone. The Louisiana law gon' get you, Amos. It ain't legal hunting alligator down in the
I think it was last week we were talking about the SAVE Act. We've been talking about it a lot. That's the federal bill that hasn't passed yet, that the president is imploring the Congress to get to his desk, that simply would require the states to implement various measures, and actually it would start with the federal government and the SAVE database to clean that up and make sure that that is functioning properly. But it would require the states to ensure what we're doing here in Mississippi as a result of the SHIELD Act passed just a couple of weeks ago. Last week, I think the governor signed it into law, that only American citizens exist on our voter rolls and thus would only be the only ones eligible to cast a ballot. Seems like pretty good common sense move to me, but the Democrats are going crazy about how this will disenfranchise voters across the country. That's why they oppose the federal SAVE Act. And many Democrats here in the state of Mississippi are also complaining about the state's measure, as we were just talking to candidate Shuwaski Young for Secretary of State about earlier. It simply would require that anyone who is registering to vote for the first time provide proof of citizenship as part of that. And the registrars are responsible for cross-checking that person's information. Actually, they don't have to do it when they come in to register, or initially. It's cross-checked against the SAVE database. I believe this is the process. And if it comes back, the SAVE database, that's the federal data set that contains information about citizenship status. And if it comes back and says, hey, this person may not be a citizen, then at that point you get contacted, and that's when you'd have to bring in some documents to prove who you are and that you're a citizen. Actually, you have to prove who you are to register. But to authenticate your citizenship, that can be done, Rhino, with a passport, a birth certificate. If that name on your birth certificate is different than the name under which you're registering because you've married, you bring a marriage certificate or some other document that shows you've legally changed your last name as a result of that marriage, you're good to go. But that's pretty much it, right? I don't think there's much more involved in that. That seems pretty straightforward to me. And again, this is only necessary for new registrants and only necessary if after the SAVE database is queried with the information you used to register, it comes back, it flags it, goes back to the registrar and says, might have an issue here, you need to check it out. Now, my guess is there'll be a teeny tiny fraction, honestly, of new voter registrations that are flagged. And the law also requires that the Secretary of State provide a report on an annual basis of all those new voter registrations that were flagged. But this is the other piece of it that is a responsibility of the Secretary of State, is that the SAVE database has to be used to cross-check the state's election system maintained by the Secretary of State, statewide election system, SEMS, S-E-M-S, the acronym for that system, that particular data set of all registered voters in the state of Mississippi. And on an annual basis, just simply have to cross-check those listed in that system with the SAVE database, the federal SAVE database. And if it comes back and flags any of those who are registered, they've got to act on that, notify the person registered who's got to come in and authenticate, and then you're good to go. And sometimes there's no doubt there could be a mistake, that the SAVE database, it possibly has an error. Talking about the federal SAVE database. Wouldn't surprise me, given that it's the federal government. But I believe that the Secretary of State would be compelled to work with the federal government to clean that up. If there is an anomaly that's discovered, is flagged, hey, this person doesn't look to be a citizen, the person comes in and says, yeah, I am. Here's my documents to prove it. Okay, you're right. They clear that up in the state system, notify the federal government, get it cleaned up on the federal government system, because otherwise it'll keep flagging it, because it's going to check it every year. And again, all that's going to be compiled in a report to the legislature, so they'll just have an idea of what the activity is happening at the Secretary of State level and really throughout the counties in the state. But there is one big central elections management system, as we talked about. But the registration, of course, occurs at the local level, at the county level. This seems pretty straightforward to me, but man, they're just raising Cain as if all these people aren't going to be able to vote. No, and they're erroneously, and I believe to some extent intentionally, misleading people into thinking, oh yeah, you got to come loaded up with all these documents to the precinct to prove you're a citizen before we give you a ballot. That's categorically false, folks. Don't fall for it. I know our listeners aren't, and we may be preaching to the choir here. But to you Democrats, quit lying about it. Fox News, SuperTalk News next, and then another hour of Middays.
You're welcome to the show that challenges you to think deeply, and look beyond political posturing. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 3 of Middays, live from the Element Well studio. We got a couple of remotes going on. Tomorrow, it's the Sports Talk team. They're going to be live at Scruggs Farm Lawn and Garden in Saltillo for their Drive Green Spring Sales event. Check out their green savings on John Deere zero-turn mowers with 0% for 36 months. Gators with 1.9% for 39 months. Compact tractors with 0% for 72 months. And other great deals. Sports Talk Mississippi live at Scruggs Farm Lawn and Garden in Saltillo tomorrow. And then Middays with me, I'm going to be live April 9th, this coming Thursday, from the South Highland Colony Parkway in Ridgeland. The Madison County Economic Development Authority will be discussing how they recruit and retain industries in the area, helping create thousands of jobs and billions in investment. I think we got a little announcement coming this Thursday. Should be fun. Should be exciting. So I was talking about these measures implemented in Mississippi's SHIELD Act to ensure that only American citizens are contained on our voter rolls. Thus, only American citizens could actually cast a ballot in an election in America. Seems pretty commonsensical to me. And then the SAVE Act at the federal level would implement similar measures, but of course that would apply to all 50 states. The Democrats are freaking out over that. But I started...
because we're closer to the next census than the previous census.
That is true.
How many seats did they gain?
Yeah.
On the sheer number of illegals they've allowed into their states?
That just seems like it's two things. One, it's another situation where no way did the drafters expect what we have today when they wrote that. They didn't expect, however many it is, 30, 40 million. We don't really know. Heck, it seemed like the whole time Biden was president, as I've talked about so many times, watching the TV in this studio, it looked like a million every time I was looking at the screen, just lined up as far as the eye could see, waiting to enter. That's over. I'd have to say that's probably the president's top accomplishment. It's a commitment he made. He acted on it. He did it. And as he said, and I know I'm repeating myself here, but it's important, we don't need any more laws. We just need a president that will enforce them. Because the prior president, Joe Biden, said, back off there, ICE. Back off, Customs and Border Patrol. Let everybody on in. He did. And then dispersed them throughout the country. Gave them flights.
Made an app for them to make it easier.
That is true. And this president says no. And I think that's what the American people wanted. I don't think there's any question.
No, you're supposed to care about the refugees and the asylees that come to America and openly admit they did so for a better life and take vacations in the country they're supposedly seeking asylum from.
Right, exactly. That's what's so upside down. I'm not buying that any of that was legitimate asylum or that they were true refugees, parolees, that's the other category. But I'm for some restricted legal path to citizenship if someone wants to come into this country. But, as I've said so many times, they need to assimilate. They need to pledge allegiance to this country. And they need to be part of the American fabric. However, sometimes you got people running for Congress. This is the case, by the way, in New Jersey, who's running a full campaign ad with zero spoken English, running for the United States House of Representatives. This is Jay Vangakar, a 28-year-old Democrat, former Biden Energy Department official, looking to be the state of New Jersey's 12th district representative. They got a primary coming up in June. He, being the son of immigrants from Mumbai, was born and raised in the state, has a 25-second video ad, speaks directly to the camera in Hindi. English text does overload, showing his name, the district, and the standard disclaimers, but no English is spoken. Is that assimilating? Shouldn't that also include speaking the language? Is there a problem? I mean, if you want to speak a different language in different settings, but when you're doing official American things like running for Congress, you speak the language that we've adopted in this country. Is that too much to ask?
I mean, if you ask a Democrat, yes.
Well, that's
if you ask a sane
sick.
person, no.
And I know I don't want to bring my family into this. It's a different matter, but I know I've talked about my father who grew up in New Orleans to Italian immigrants. And as a child, he would mimic the adults speaking Italian, and they'd slap him upside the head, and he'd say, "Speak English. You're in America." Where's that attitude? And consequently,
because they're not coming here to be Americans. They're coming here to loot American tax dollars.
That's a sad thing, man. So this guy's running for United States Congress and has an ad in which no English is spoken. A video ad we're talking about. Absolutely incredible. On the C Spire text line, Paul and Meridian, I know this was applying to what we were talking about earlier with respect to the SAVE Act and the SHIELD Act in Mississippi, says, once again, the key word here, common sense, which the Democrats have done. And I see, Paul, you wanted to know about the Secretary of State, Michael Watson, now a candidate, having announced for lieutenant governor, his stance on medical marijuana and future legalization. I didn't get the impression, honestly, Paul, that today on his big announcement day, he wants to dig too far into the details of specific policy issues. And so I refrained from that. I did ask a few just high-profile matters, high profile in that they were debated this year, and then even in prior years as well, such as mobile sports betting and education freedom and so forth. I thought that was reasonable, but you could tell that he's more interested in talking at a more generic level today. But there's no doubt he'll come out during his candidacy, and you'll hear more about his specific policy positions and vision. I have no doubt about that. Wayne, by the way, in Batesville, appreciate this, Wayne, says, as an election commissioner, I can tell a woman whose name changed due to marriage will have no problem voting at her precinct on Election Day. Appreciate that. I believe that as well. And if I'm not mistaken, Rhino, if there's an issue, can't you vote, sign an affidavit, and then get that cleaned up within a certain period of time after Election Day? So it's not like we're disenfranchising anybody, turning anybody away. That's not the case here. But the Democrats want you to believe you got to have a wheelbarrow full of documents, the way they describe it, to show up at the polling place and have some poll worker review those documents, clear you to vote. I mean, that's what they're basically telling people. And that tens of millions of women are going to get turned away because they're married and their information doesn't match and all that sort of stuff. And that's just horse hockey. That is not the case here. The bigger question to me is, okay, well, if not this, then what? To make sure. Because that's pretty much what, even when they start referring to the various amendments in our Constitution that refer to our right to vote as enshrined in our Constitution, I agree with them on that. But it also very clearly cites citizens. Doesn't say anybody shows up. It says citizens. And so, okay, if we're to adhere to the Constitution, how do you recommend we confirm that they're citizens? Do we just ignore that?
They'd like you to.
I think so. Well, of
because
course.
They care about illegals more than they do American citizens.
And that's the sad truth. Right there. That's the sad truth. Just like I believe they care more about criminals than they do victims of crime. To a great extent, I feel like they want this country to lose its effort to rid Iran of its nuclear weapons and its ballistic missile capability, which we now know could actually hit targets in Europe with what I thought at one time were our allies. I'm starting to question that here lately. I think the president has exposed that very directly and succinctly. But so what do you want, Democrats? You just want no check whatsoever? Just let anybody never? And I think you're right. That is what they want, sadly, unfortunately, which is also why they opened the borders the way they did, to let all these people in, not only to increase the numbers with respect to the number of House seats and so forth, but in the districts that they control, but also on Election Day, they want those people in line to vote. So it's what they want. Man, oh man. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio. Stay with us.
Hey, this is Bob, and if you're...
Check it out. Let's do this.
The talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's get on with it.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth studio. So once again, Rhino, for the audience that maybe they just tuned in, now that the 2026 session, at least at this point, appears to be totally done over, the number of total bills that were filed, what do you say, 4,100?
4,005.
5, okay. Right at 4,000. The number that have been enacted.
189 with 4 vetoes.
And the number pending the governor's signature.
Also 189.
I find that really interesting. It's the exact number. That is totally interesting. So what's that, 378? Yeah. How about that? So 378, less than 10% of the total 4,000 filed. That's what we had in this particular session. On the C Spire text line, question about the PERS retirement. This is from Derek in Greenwood. I'm not in the public system. Why was the law enforcement officer community so upset by the extension just to have the president of the Sheriff's or Police Association, can't remember which one, pushing hard for the 30-day return? I thought it was too hard to work past the retirement time. Why not do like many private sectors and have the rule of 75? That's tenure plus age equals 75. If that sums to 75, you can retire. Well, a couple of things I'd say, Derek. I don't know that they were advocating for the reduced amount of time before one could return to work in the role they had before they retired, a more rigorous role in law enforcement. There are lots of other jobs in law enforcement that perhaps aren't quite as rigorous, and then they could go do something else as well. They don't have to necessarily return to law enforcement. But the bigger thing, what do you got, Rhino? Are we getting this right? But the bigger thing that I think that law enforcement wanted was the number of years required to retire at any age. By far, that was a much more concerning issue to the first responder community because it does take its toll on a person physically to work in those jobs. And so 35 years, those additional 5 can be quite taxing on the body. And so reducing that down to 30, which is what it is in the other tiers prior to Tier 5 of the Public Employees Retirement System, is what we ended up with. I also just simply made the point that, well, that was designed actually to help with the stabilization of the PERS retirement fund. And so reversing that back to 30 means that that little change no longer is in effect. Okay, guys, you need to come up with something else to address the $25 billion unfunded liability. And I thought we were going to get a big infusion of cash and then some sort of recurring infusion, but that didn't happen either. Both the Senate and the House had different approaches to that. None of those made it across the finish line, so we wound up the session without really any major effort to address the unfunded liability of PERS. Did address some of the concerns, again, from the law enforcement and first responder community, no doubt about that, as we just discussed, but the actual financial stability of the program, or instability, remains, and hopefully we'll do something about that. Ben from Madison says, talking about the president, a whole civilization. I know the president speaks in hyperboles, but that is stronger language than any president in history. To me, it doesn't seem to come from a place of strength, but rather a place of desperation. I thought that as well, Ben. I think it's, I don't know if I'd say desperation as much as I would just frustration that we haven't seen more movement on the part of the regime. I think the president fully expected this thing would be over and behind us, that they would capitulate, surrender, cut a deal, whatever, to get the strait reopened and ensure that the handful of objectives the president had would be obtained, and that mainly is can't make a nuclear weapon, don't have any, and can't make any. Those were sort of two objectives. And then also eliminate their intercontinental ballistic missile capability and production thereof, to secure the nations that are around there as well, the safety of those being in place. That was another major issue. And then to obliterate, which I think this has been done from all reports, the Air Force and the Navy of Iran. I think that happened in fairly short order. It's amazing to me that the country of Iran has 93 million people. Iraq, on the other hand, is like 30 million, as I recall, about a third of that. So Iran's bigger than what? UK, France, Italy, Spain combined, I think, the way the numbers work out, as I can recall from memory there. $93 million is a lot. That's about 2.2 the size of California from a population perspective.
Yeah, their latest numbers from March of last year have them at 86.5 million.
Okay. So
but yeah, they're ahead of the UK at 69 million, France at 69 million, Italy at 59 million.
Bigger than all those countries.
Spain at 50 million.
Okay. I find that interesting. Of course, I think from a land area perspective, it's a bigger nation than those, right? Iran is a much bigger nation than the UK, for example. Certainly France, Italy, Spain. That's a bunch of people crammed into a small area. There are both pros and cons to that, as you know. I know one thing is they were a little faster than us in building out wired internet capability, for example, in those European nations when that was going on back in the 90s and early 2000s, just because you had much less land that you had to traverse to install all the wire and all the electronics to power it up. Interesting.
I'm just looking at the list of countries and dependencies by land area, and Iran comes in at 17th.
Okay.
They've got 630,000 square miles.
Wow.
But by comparison, the next one on the list up above Iran, the British Antarctic Territory.
Okay. The Antarctic territory.
The Brits have more territory in the Antarctic than Iran.
I didn't know that. Wow. Interesting. Ben also says, I'm calling on our delegation to amend the Constitution to revise birthright citizenship. It really doesn't sound like we will get a favorable ruling on Trump's executive order. I know y'all aren't fans of Thomas Massey, but he has filed resolutions in the past to do as much. Our delegation should follow suit, in my opinion. I'm not necessarily a Thomas Massey opponent or detractor. I find some things that I agree with and some I don't. But I hear you, Ben. And, yeah, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. To me, the simple way to address this is, look, if you enter the country illegally, we don't care if you have a baby or not. If that baby's born to an illegal, they're not a citizen. That would be the simple fix to me. If you're naturalized or you have legal immigration status, I might be able to live with that. And there are a number of legal immigration status, provided, of course, Rhino, that we're applying policy, rules, regulations, and law to the legal immigration status being granted. That was not the case under Biden, for sure. They were handing that out, of course, like candy on Halloween night. So it's a little different. As long as those standards are adhered to and they are reasonable and rigorous, I could probably live with that. I don't think that's a big issue. But you enter the country illegally, you're smuggled in here by these birth tourist shakedown artists from China, the cartels from south of our border, which are just engaged in human trafficking to drop a baby so that baby is a citizen and is eligible for a number of the benefits that citizens are eligible for, even if they are offspring but live in the household of illegals. And there's been some talk about even requiring somebody in the house to be a citizen, an adult that's a guardian or a parent of a child as well, which I could live with. But I hear you, Ben. Of course, you know that amending the Constitution is an extremely tall task, intentionally designed that way by our framers. You looked it up the other day, Rhino, 2/3 of our Congress, I think, to get something out there for the states to ratify, then 75% of the states, 3/4 of the states. Just don't see that happening, do you, in this particular matter? Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio. Stay with us.
From the with Gerard Gibert.
Welcome to our shop.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Okay, now you have a good one.
Welcome back, everyone. Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. Go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income growth and guarantees. The investors feeling a little bit more chipper on the corner of Wall and Broad because the NASDAQ only down 63 points at this point. The Dow at one time down nearly 500, only down 108 points. So they're reading some news. It's got them feeling a little better about the situation. Meanwhile, down there in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis, he is pushing for a ban on first cousin marriages in the state. Well, that's interesting. He said Florida doesn't ban marriage, and that's a hanging curveball for us to do. We need to do that. Doesn't ban cousin marriage, pardon me. And that's a hanging curveball for us to do. We need to do that. He pointed out that other states have already taken steps to prohibit such unions and expressed confusion over why we haven't done that or they haven't done that in the state of Florida. Well, that's interesting. I didn't even know that was a thing at this point. Yeah.
It's as much as 50% of the population in nations like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and southern parts of India.
So Tennessee in 2024, they made first cousin marriage a criminal offense. Didn't know that either. That's interesting. Kentucky and Texas actually prohibit the practice, but there are some southern states that allow it. Illegal in at least 32 states is the last information that I see here. Well, that's interesting. Didn't know that was a thing. So on the C Spire text line, someone says, well, Ben, our friend from Madison, thinks we're negotiating with the reasonable people in Iran. Was he okay with their country putting a bounty on our pilot? Were Trump's words worse than shooting their own people? Well, I think it's fair to say, in defense of Ben here, that wiping out an entire civilization may be a bit harsh, may be a bit extreme for the situation, but I also think that the president's just frustrated that more progress hasn't been made, and it's hard to tell exactly what he means by this, whether or not that's how he intends to act. I mean, could this country wipe Iran off the face of the earth? Yeah, it could, and all 93 million people in it.
I mean, we have over 5,000 portable suns.
Well, that's a good point. That's true. All that could cause problems. And we were talking on the break about this announcement that the president made yesterday, actually Easter Sunday, where he said, you got 48 hours, and that's what's happening now. We're winding that down because that is literally
7 o'clock tonight.
Yeah, our time, 7 o'clock tonight, 8 o'clock. I was about to say 6 hours away. It's approaching. So this truth that he posted this morning to kind of get their attention, that's really what that was about. But it was on Sunday, Easter Sunday, where he said that all hell was going to break loose, that your bridges and your power plants would be gone if you didn't come to the table and negotiate a deal. And then, of course, they began forcing their citizens, including children, to assemble around power plants and bridges to serve as human shields to deter this country from attacking, right, those facilities. That's the idea, thinking that America wouldn't do so with innocent civilians, again, serving as these human shields. But we were talking on the break that wouldn't be surprised to learn that this country, this military, has technology that could still take out their electricity systems.
Oh, yeah.
But spare the people, not really do any destruction and damage to even the power plants themselves.
Yeah, that's been a capability of the U.S. military publicly since Desert Storm, Iraq 1.0. I mean, they knocked out something like 50 to 60% of that country's entire grid in the first few hours of the war.
Yeah.
With what's called graphite bombs, where it's essentially little graphite filaments that come out of the munition that gets dropped onto the target and short circuits the electrical grid.
Okay.
It doesn't knock down the towers and doesn't knock down the transformers, doesn't blow up the generation. It just short circuits it for between 24 and 48 hours. I mean, they were used in Desert Storm, they were used in Bosnia. And you would think if we had that capability in the 90s, we still have that capability now. So if you play Ring Around the Rosie around the power plant, and then they drop what are called soft bombs and short-circuit the power plant, you're just going to be playing Ring Around the Rosie in the dark.
As I recall, though, there is the risk of more permanent severe damage to the power plants as well. It just depends on the particular technology, the weapon used, and I guess the severity of the short-circuiting and the disruption itself as to whether or not it's more permanent or if it's temporary. But the point is, you could wreak havoc on the electrical grid in the country and spare human life. That's the main point. So you got to read between the lines a little bit on the president's warning. I think that's the main point here. It's interesting to see what he may do. So, yeah, there's no doubt. I don't think, and I'm going to speak on Ben's behalf here, if that's okay, and he can send us a text if I misrepresent his views. But to our person here, I think Ben would agree that, yeah, these people are heinous, they're barbaric, they're criminal, they're evil, wicked, everything you could come up with, and it's extremely difficult, if not fully impossible, to have a reasonable, rational negotiation with them to try to reach a conclusion to this event and move forward and end it. I think he would agree with that. But when you say you're going to wipe out civilization, yeah, that sounds a bit extreme. I would agree with that as well. I think the president's just frustrated, honestly. And I think he's looking for some movement on their part, and he's frustrated over the fact that there just has been little to none. And he knows that the pressure's on, that the American people want resolution here. And they also want to know, okay, when do we call it a day? You know, what gets achieved and what's measurable is really, I think, the way to describe it. Measurable, discernible, and can be confirmed, has occurred, that says and signals, yeah, we've achieved the objectives, we're done, and we can retreat, we can pull out. And I think that's the big question that's on Americans' minds. I think most Americans would say, yeah, we don't need these crazy people to have a nuclear weapon. I certainly feel that way, and I'm okay with taking necessary action to eliminate that capability and future capability and threat. But I'm also not for a protracted war. I don't want to see that. Don't want to see boots on the ground, and certainly don't want to see loss or injury of Americans. To Americans. Certainly don't want to see that, be they members of the armed forces or civilians. So it's just a complicated deal. I guess the bottom line is, hey, you fools in Iran, you regime, why don't you just act right and we can just end this whole thing? That would be the best outcome and move forward. But it's just they're not wired that way. I mean, they really are. This is literally their mission in life. It's their core mission is to eliminate all those who they can hold as infidels, right? Who they consider their mortal enemies and don't adhere to their crazy, twisted, perverted, cult-like, I guess you could call it a religion. It's more of a practice than it is a religion in my view. It's hard for me to even attach that word religion to it. But that's where we are. Hopefully they will stand down and we can get this thing behind us and return to a world without so many dang wars, and especially this country involved in them, and work on other things. So Ben says, yeah, entire civilization is language never used by a president. Sounds almost like he's threatening nuclear weapons to a degree. To me, that sounds desperate. I get you. I think it's a reasonable conclusion. It's he's just frustrated. Coming right back, final segment.
Hello, I'm...
Properly set all controls before recording.
All systems go.
The talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
We're back with you in the Element Well studio. Mose says you destroy the substations and leave the plant standing. Yeah, I think that's kind of what you were talking about, right, Rhino? That I'm quite sure we have all sorts of sophisticated technology, some of which we may not even know about, honestly. And I was asking you about a big deal I remember. I want to say it was even featured on the front of one of the, back in those days, the big magazines, because we relied a lot on news-type periodicals for our news. Newsweek, Time, one of those, the neutron bomb. I remember when that was announced, and I was stunned at just how amazing that technology was. And it was designed to destroy buildings and structures. Is that right? Flip it. People, but leave the buildings and structures.
Yeah, it was
That's
designed
right.
to put out more neutron radiation so that it kills the enemy soldiers and leaves the infrastructure in place.
There you go. And I remember just with strong interest just reading through it. I was just fascinated by all that technology. Like, how could you do that? And it's almost seems like science fiction, but it wasn't. So, and someone asked about using EMP technology, which we've always been concerned about someone using that against us and taking our grid down and rendering us without electricity, which would be a problem, obviously, for a lot of reasons.
But the saving grace in that fear is that, at least at this point, with publicly available information, there's not enough energy density in our current technology to allow for a non-nuclear EMP to be viable.
Yeah.
You can set off a small EMP in a lab setting with a lot of equipment, but to implement that in the form of a munition or something that could be used in warfare, we still just don't have the technology, at least that we know about, to set off an EMP without at least a small-scale nuclear explosion, which once you reopen that can of worms, it's going to be really hard to
Agree.
Put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Karen in Oxford says, I think the president is absolutely dealing with psychopaths who only speak psychopath. He would never, nor is it legal for him to announce exact targets like that. Just wait for it. It's Trump. I get it, Karen. I do. But you'd also have to acknowledge that he has delivered a couple of other ultimatums in the last couple of weeks and then ultimately stood back on that. And it remains to be seen. It's a guessing game, and I understand that's part of the strategy as well. So I'm hoping that between now and 7 o'clock tonight, our time, that whomever the heck's in charge in Iran comes to their senses and comes to the table to negotiate a deal, is what I'm hoping it actually occurs. Jason in Starkville says, too bad the gay BB never came about.
Gay bomb.
Oh, the gay bomb.
Yeah, the Cold War was basically the closest to federally sanctioned mad scientists we've ever had, because you had one scientist that tried to come up with a way to disperse hormones and pheromones that would cause same-sex relationships within the ranks of foreign or enemy soldiers. You had one crazy scientist that literally, he didn't develop it, but he proved it was possible to create a doomsday device, which was like 3 layers of nuclear explosions in one that would pretty much leave a giant crater the size of a hemisphere.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that was the Cold War. You had what was the name of it? I forget the name of it, but there was a concept back when bombers were still the feared method of delivering nuclear warheads before the intercontinental ballistic missile systems got up and running. When we feared just waves upon waves of Russian bombers coming over the Arctic Circle, there were air-to-air nukes.
Yeah.
They were just going to wipe out entire wings of Russian bombers with nukes in the sky.
Lee in Philadelphia says Netanyahu has been arguing Iran is 3 weeks away from having a nuclear bomb for 40 years. He went into Iraq under similar false pretense. Is it possible for you, Gerard, to acknowledge this fact? I really haven't done the research on that, Lee, so I can't comment on it one way or another. All I know is what the president and this administration informed the American people in the world, and I'm going with that until proven otherwise. So does our government make mistakes in these matters, even from an intelligence perspective? Absolutely. But I'll also make this quick point as we depart today. Only now is the technology available to execute this mission and this operation the way we have. That technology 5 years ago even did not exist. Massive improvements in technology, and our military has it, and the rest of the world's do not. And if for no other reason other than this, China has taken note, and they know that they are no match for this country from a military perspective, and I think that's a good thing. We're out of here today. Back with you tomorrow. Stay safe, and God bless everyone.
A SuperTalk Mississippi media production.